Hello and welcome to my JavaScript tutorial. I'm starting a new job in about 2 weeks that requires me to use a lot of JavaScript to interact with the database. So I knew I needed to brush up, so I thought I would kind of record sort of the basics so maybe someone else can benefit from it. So this is going to be a JavaScript tutorial from the bare minimum. You don't need to have any prior coding experience, but it definitely would help. You don't need to download an IDE. I'm going to show you pretty much how to get started from the bare minimum of you knowing how to work a computer. The IDE I'm going to be using, well, it's not really an IDE, but it sort of is called Cloud9. So if you Google Cloud9 or if you go to c9.io, you're going to be asked to make an account. It's pretty easy, it's free, I don't think you need that much information, but this allows you to sort of have a web-based IDE, and you can do things other than JavaScript in it. It's actually very cool, and it shares it, or it allows you to access it through the interwebs. The tutorial I'm going to be using is from w3schools.com, right? So w3schools.com. Go to this website. They've got tutorials for pretty much everything. I am going to be basing it off of this one. I know pretty much all this. If I don't know it in JavaScript, I know it in definitely Java, but I'm going to be working through it with you as well. So nevertheless, let's get started. Let's set up our workspace in Cloud9. So once you sign into your brand new Cloud9 account, you're going to be presented with this. You won't have this. I made this earlier. So we're going to create a new workspace. So you click on this little plus bar. We're going to call this JavaScript. Oh yeah. And you can make it private or public. I think my other one's private, so I'm going to make this one public. And then this is where you pick what language you're going to be typing in. I know we said we're doing JavaScript, but we're going to start off with HTML5. Might move on to Node.js later, but HTML is pretty simple. So we're going to create our workspace. It's going to take a couple of minutes. And I'm going to try and sort of teach this in a way that if you haven't learned any prior coding, this is a good way to start. This will allow you to sort of jumpstart into Java, whatever else you want to learn. Alright, so it finished loading, and this is what we're presented with. This is our development environment, okay? Looks a little bit confusing, but let me give you a little tour. This is the active window. We can, right now it's opening a readme.md, and you can see over here, this is the file explorer. We can see I readme.md. That's what we're reading, right? I opened it up twice. There's also a hello world.html, and these are all in a workshop file, which we just created, called JavaScript. So whatever you named your workspace, I think it's called. This is what is going to be right here. This is a terminal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close out this. I'm going to delete this. Where's sleep? Here it is. Yeah. I'm going to continue and delete this as well, and we're going to start from scratch, right? And we're also going to close that out. If you want to change any of the settings here, all you got to do is go up here and click on this little gear, right? So a couple things you want to know, themes. If you click on that, you can change the themes. I'm going to change mine to Chrome, so that way you guys can see a little bit better. Another thing you can do is you can change your text size if you have trouble seeing it. It looks like mine's on 16, so I think that should be good for you guys to see. We'll just have to see. And then close that out with this X right here. Alright, so we are going to make a new HTML file. We're going to go to File. This is important. You need to go to New File from Template, not New File. If you go to New File, it's just going to be a blank file. But because we're doing HTML, a template makes it a lot easier. So we're going to go to New File from Template. And actually, it lets you do just a JavaScript file. So let me just test this out real quick. Alright, so this is a little iffy. So we're gonna go back and do this as an HTML. So once again, file, new from template, HTML file. This is a little bit more confusing, right? But bear with me for a second. HTML, and this is going to be a little brief introduction into HTML, is constructed with tags, right? So we have our HTML tag, and a tag is always surrounded by these little arrows. And each tag has a closing tag, so you can see we have our HTML opening tag, and this is a closing tag, and the only difference is this backslash. And you can see that's true with head, which surrounds the title, as well as body. This does not really make that much of a difference for JavaScript. This is sort of the web page format for interacting with JavaScript. So, in order to start your little JavaScript adventure, you are going to need a script tag, right? And it auto-completes for you if you hit enter. This is not the script tag we're going to be using. This is if you had an HTML file and you had a separate JavaScript file that you wanted to include. But we are going to take this crap out, and we are just going to do a script tag and a closing script tag, right? And it's just going to know that it's JavaScript, right? And this is where you put your JavaScript in for the basics, right? So let us start off with the basics, and we are going to learn output, right? So in order to start output, we're going to type into the script tag, and we're going to type window period or dot alert. You can see it auto completes. When it does like this, all you got to do is hit enter, but it made a parentheses. Inside these parentheses is the parameters for our message, right? A parameter is just a fancy word for like basic sort of instructions. So inside the parentheses, we are going to type our message, and we can type a number like 5. And you always end a statement in any language, like any scripting language, with a semicolon. That is really important to remember. So you always end in a semicolon. And we can hit preview, and we can hit live preview from file. And this is the file we created over here. And if we hit that, whammo bammo, it doesn't show anything right now, but that's because we haven't saved it. So you can go to file, save, or you can hit Control S, right? Just hit yes. So now if we refresh this, you can see that it alerted us with a window that says 5. That's pretty cool, huh? Some other things we can do is we can do 5 plus 1, right? So I want you to kind of take a guess about what this is going to do. I will tell you that first it's going to pop up with an alert of 5, and then it's going to pop up with an alert of whatever this tells it to do. All right, so if we save this and we refresh this, we've got our 5 dialog, and then it says 6. So as you can imagine, that's pretty cool. It didn't simply put 5 plus 1, it followed this mathematical operator. So you can do all the basic operators with this. You know, you could do like you could do 10 divided by 3. And another thing you might be thinking is, especially if you've learned Java, how is it going to handle this decimal? Because 10 does not divide by 3 evenly, right? 3.33335. So in JavaScript, it really doesn't care if you have a decimal. It's going to handle it either way. You don't have to float anything. You don't have to do anything like that. It did round it off, obviously, because 3.33 would be a repeating decimal for 10 divided by 3, but you know, it went pretty far into that. So another thing you can window.alert is a word, right? Some text, which is pretty important. So we could type hello, but hello is a string, and a string, all a string is a string. When it's in the format of a string, it lets the computer know that this is just text and to treat it as just text, right? So in order to declare a string, you put it inside quotation marks, and you can use double quotation marks or you can use single quotation marks, right? So if we run this now, it's going to say hello. Had we not used these quotation marks, it would be looking for something called hello, and it wouldn't run because it can't find. And that's what this exclamation mark is. It's saying hello is not defined, which means it can't find anything called hello. If we wanted to, earlier we had 5 plus 1, right? And it would output 6. If we surrounded that in quotations, it would treat that as a string. So it would literally do character 5, character plus mark, character 1. So 5 plus 1. There you go. So what else can we do? Variables. Variables are very important. If you took Java, if you know Java, there's ints, cars, doubles, all that crap. The only thing in JavaScript is a var, short for variable, right? And just like in math, you might have an x, right? So we can say variable x equals 5, right? Pretty simple. And then we could do window.alert x, and it should pop up with whatever we've told it is x, which is 5. That's cool, right? And we can declare a variable like this, saying variable x equals 5, or we can say variable x, and this is called initializing the variable, right? We said there's a variable named x, and next we are saying that x equals 5. Another thing to remember in JavaScript is spaces don't really matter, but case does, right? So I can put as many spaces as you want, and as you can imagine, this is useful for sort of organizing it. However, case does matter, so if I did an uppercase W, oh shit, whoops, I alt-tabbed instead of, where are we at? No, I closed out the whole thing, didn't I? Shit. Alright. Sorry, guys. Alright, here we go. So if we did a uppercase W, that throws a error, because it has to be lowercase w. It has to match the case. And just for kicks, you can see that as when I declare this variable like this, it still says 5. I usually like to declare my variables like this just because it saves space, but it's useful if you want to declare a variable and later make it something, right? Something else we can do is we can say, we can make another variable, we can call this y, and we can call this 1, right? And then we can do the whole x, the 5 plus 1 thing, but we could do x plus y, alright? That was pretty cool. And it's going to give us 6. We could even go so far as to put variable z equals x plus y, and this would kind of save us some space. And we also always end in an not an exclamation mark, a semicolon. And that kind of saves us space down here, right? So we can just say window.alert z, and since we know that z is a variable x plus a variable y, and we've declared these up here, it's going to run through that. And what else can we do? We can also make a variable a string, right? So we can say variable y is equal to hello. So what would this output, do you think? It would just put 5 hello. If you wanted a space, because as you can see, it literally just did 5 and hello, you could put a little space in front of this. Now I would say 5 hello. Or you could do, and actually let's make this an actual sentence, right? So we can do, there. We could change this to y plus x to get it in the right order. So now, oh, we didn't save it. It says hello there with no space. We could also do a variable, I don't know, q is equal to, and inside these quotation marks just put a space, and then we could do y plus q plus x, right? We save that sucker, hit refresh, and hello there. Isn't that cool? You are making the computer talk for you. So as you can imagine, that can be pretty useful. Something you can do as you get into sort of bugs and stuff is you can throw some window.alerts in and have it alert you different things, so you can test when something doesn't work. Comments are something also important, right? So if you want to take some notes in your code, if you wanted to say like, here I'm defining my variables, right? Comment is either what's it called? Describe, I don't know, initialize. It's 2 backspaces, right? So we can type whatever we want in here, and it's not gonna show up in the code, right? This is just for our benefit and the benefit of other people reading our code. Another way we can do this is asterisk or star, and then backslash, and then backslash star, right? Did I do that right? No. It must be the other way around. Yeah. So backslash star and then star backslash, and we can type whatever we want in here. And it's kind of like a tag and a closing tag, in that you can put whatever you want in here, and it's considered that comment. So we could do, I usually just stick with slash slash, right? So we can do declaring our variables, which is right here. Cool. So comments are something good as you make like bigger and bigger projects, and kind of keep track of it better. So if you're coming back to it, you can kind of pick up where you left off, right? So something else I want to talk about is some operators you might not be familiar with, right? So if we do variable x, right, and we say variable x equals, let's say 10, right? What if we said x plus equals, in the order that it shows on your keyboard, well, at least on my keyboard, 5, right? And then we said window dot alert x. What would that do? 15, right? So the plus equal operator just says x now is equal to x plus 5. Pretty useful. You can also do this with text, right? So you can say variable x equals hello plus equals how are you? And that's kind of cool. It's gonna say hello, how are you? So that's, you know, this is sort of learning how to swim, right? And once you learn how to swim, you can be like a dolphin or a whale or whatever your mind wants to be, right? So what else can we learn? We learned sort of the basic arithmetic. We learned variables. Assignments. So we talked about the plus equals, right? Let us talk about some other ones. So we'll stick with the x equaling 10, and we'll stick with using 5 as other variables. So now why is this giving me an error? Oh, I see. I took out my script tag. There we go. So we can do it with plus equals. We can also do it with minus equals. So that's gonna give us 5, right? Maybe. Hello, computer. Oh, I took out the window dollar too. I'm sorry, guys. This is the least professional tutorial that you've ever probably watched. Yep. So now that's 5. We can also do I don't know, we can do divided, and we could say like 2, so that's going to give us 5 as well. And I actually forgot to save it that time, so just so you can see, it's going to give us 5 still. And we could do times 2, which is signified by this asterisk, and that gives us 20. Another thing you could probably don't know is the modulus operator, which is the percentage sign, right? So the percentage sign is like the remainder. So if we said x modulus 3, that's going to say, okay, 10 divided by 3 is 9, gives us a remainder of 1. So it should output 1. Oh, well, it would if we had put that in here. And if we also saved it. Yeah, see, there we go, 1. So basically it just said 10 divided by 3, that gives us 9, but 9 is not quite 10, there's a difference of 1, that's our remainder. You can also do that with the equal sign, right? So now it's gonna change since the modulus of 3 into 10 is 1, it's gonna say x is now equal to 1, right? Correctamundo. Alright, so something else we're going to talk about is the data types in JavaScript. We talked about variables right here, and I'm going to sort of expand on that. So I'm going to throw some text on here, right, from the W3 schools. What a magnificent place. I definitely encourage you to go there. So we've got a couple things on here, but they're all vars, as you can see. And we're going to space them out a little bit so you guys can see a little bit better. So we used var to describe all these, and if you're familiar with Java, you'll know that this is probably an int, string, array, that kind of stuff. In JavaScript, it's all called var. The way that you sort of tell it what this is tells it what sort of data type it is, right? So it's saying, since you're giving this a single integer, or a double even, whatever, just a number, it's going to call this a number. This is a string. We talked about that since it's surrounded in quotation marks. This is an array. An array is signified by the brackets, and it is an array of objects, right? And it can be an array of anything. It could be an array of numbers, strings. We could replace this with like 1, 2, 3. But it's an array of strings. They look like car brands. But you could do strings, numbers, objects, anything. This is an object. We're gonna change this from variable x to variable person. So how can we use these, right? Well, obviously we learned how we can use numbers and strings. How could we use an array? We can use an array for counting, for sort of organizing data, really sort of more complex things than we're going to get into right now. One thing I want to talk about is that data types in JavaScript are dynamic, right? So if we say, we declare a variable x, right? And let's say right now x is undefined, right? X is undefined right now if we don't know what it is. Now we can say x equals 10. Now x is defined as a number, right? What if we afterwards said x equals the string come on, quit auto-completing for me. But, right? So you would think, hey, that should be confusing to the computer because it's going to say x equals 10 and x equals buts. But as you can see, since JavaScript uses dynamic data types, it's going to use whatever the last thing we said it was, right? So it should say buts, right? So that's kind of useful. Another thing you can do with this is, well, we learned the whole x plus equals 1, and that would give us 11, right? That's sort of an expansion on the dynamic data types because it's the same thing as saying x equals x plus 1. And the plus equals is just a sort of shortened version of that. You can also do booleans in JavaScript, so we could say x equals true, and now it's going to recognize that as a boolean. And these sort of, all these data types like arrays and objects, these are sort of for your bigger sort of tasks, right? And we'll get onto that. We'll get onto that in probably the next video. The last thing I'm going to talk about in this video is functions, because I don't want to hit you guys with too much stuff at once, right? So a function is just a pre-recorded task that you make, right? And it can be anything you want. And to declare a function, you write the word function. You name your function. We're going to call it our function. Inside these parentheses are the parameters, right? So a function takes objects, and we'll get to that in a second, right? And then inside these curly braces is what your function does. So let's say we wanted to take a function that added two numbers together, right? So we are going to hit return. Return just if once you call the function, this is what it's going to do with the output. It's going to return it to the program. So we're going to return x plus y. All right, and it's giving us a little notification that x and y are not defined, right? And that is because, as I mentioned, this is where you would put your parameters. So since this requires an x and a y, we are going to put an x and a y up here, separated by a comma, right? And there's our function. Like that's all there is to it. That is a simple function. So we said function, we named it our function, we wrote out what we wanted it to do. We wanted to return x plus y, and since we need an x and a y, we put that inside the parameters. To call this function, all we have to do, actually, instead of return, let's make this window dot alert, right? That way we can see kind of what we're doing. Now all we have to do now is type the name of our function and see it saved it for us. We needed an x and a y, so let's make it 10 and 5, or 4. 4 is fine, whatever. And end it with a semicolon. So now if we run this, 14, because we called our function, it said, okay, we're going to call our function. They gave us an x and a y, a 10 and a 4, so 10 plus 4 is 14, and we need the window dot alert that. This makes programming so much easier because you can write functions that do pretty much whatever you need it to do. So if you're doing like a complex task over and over, just write a function for it, then all you got to do is call the function, right? And we'll get into that more later. But this is sort of where I want to end the video today because, you know, we went through a lot of stuff. So just to recap, we went over basic HTML and how this is structured. We went over the window.alert function. Well, yeah, it is a function. The window.alert and how to sort of get that output. We went over variables like var x, var y, and how variables have complex data types and can be numbers, strings. We talked about arrays and objects, but we didn't get into that today. We talked about operators and how you can use basic math operators like plus, minus, subtraction. We talked about modulus. We talked about how you can plus equals stuff and minus equals stuff. We talked about data types, and we ended on functions. So if you're following along at home and you want to get a little bit of practice, like I said, please go to cloud9.com or c9.io, create a workspace, and just, you know, mess around with this stuff. Go to W3 Schools and follow along with the tutorial. It's really not hard. JavaScript is probably one of the easiest languages to learn, especially to start off with. So I definitely implore you to give it a shot. As always, thank you for watching, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me.